The storm raged outside, a violent crescendo that seemed to echo the turmoil within Sarah. She stood at the door, her hand trembling as it hovered over the handle. The truth she had just uncovered hit her like a thunderclap, shattering the calm that had once defined her life. It felt as though the walls were closing in, and the cold wind that swept through the cracks in the door was a harsh reminder of how alone she truly was. The one person she had trusted more than anyone had betrayed her in the most unforgivable way. Yet, despite the storm, she still longed for him, her heart conflicted. She had been lied to, betrayed, but the love she still carried for him was like an anchor in a sea of chaos. How could she confront him? How could she face the one person she had given everything to? The pain was unbearable, and yet, Sarah knew this was only the beginning. Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. She wanted to hate him, wanted to walk away, and never look back. But her heart refused to let go. The love she had for him was a deep, unshakable part of her. She couldn't deny it, no matter how badly he had hurt her. The storm outside mirrored the chaos within her soul. As the rain poured down, Sarah's eyes drifted to the old photograph on the floor, its shattered edges reflecting the brokenness she felt inside. She had always thought their love was invincible, that nothing could tear them apart. But the truth had done just that. The lies, the betrayal, it had all been too much to bear. But now, standing at the door, she had a choice. Would she open it and let him in, or would she close it for good, cutting ties forever? The silence was suffocating as Sarah slowly sank into the couch, her hands still gripping the torn photograph. The weight of the decision ahead crushed her. The storm outside had calmed, but the storm within her heart was far from over. She could hear the faint echo of her mentor's voice healing, "Requires facing the storm within you, not running from it." His words had always felt like a comforting truth, but now, in this moment of anguish, they felt like an impossible burden. How could she face the pain, the betrayal, the loss? How could she confront the broken pieces of her heart and rebuild from them? Her mind was consumed with what-ifs and maybes, but none of them brought any clarity. The only thing she knew for certain was that this moment would define her. It would be the point where everything changed, where she either broke or found the strength to heal. But first, she had to decide whether to let go of the past or hold on to the memories that had once been everything to her. With a deep breath, Sarah stood, her eyes lingering on the photograph one last time before letting it fall to the floor. She couldn't keep clinging to a love that no longer existed. It was time to face what lay beyond the door. The path before her was unclear, and the uncertainty was terrifying, but she knew that to move forward, she needed to close this chapter. There was no more room for half-truths and broken promises. She wiped her tear-streaked face, taking another deep breath as she approached the door. The wind had died down, and the storm outside had faded into a soft, steady rain, almost like a whispering lullaby, urging her to step forward. Sarah reached for the handle, hesitating for a moment. Was she ready? Her heart ached with every breath she took, but it was time to face him. And more importantly, it was time to face herself. There was no turning back now. The door creaked open slowly as Sarah stepped into the storm. She could feel the chill in the air, a sharp contrast to the warmth inside. Her heart raced as she took in the sight of him, standing there, soaked to the bone, his eyes filled with uncertainty and regret. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but the words caught in his throat. "Sarah, I didn't know where else to go," he said, his voice hoarse. For a moment, they both just stood there, the sound of the rain pounding against the ground like a drum beat. Sarah's mind raced with 1,000 emotions. Anger, confusion, sadness. Yet, beneath it all, there was still a flicker of the love she had once felt. Could it be enough to forgive him? Could they move past everything that had been broken? The moment felt like it stretched on forever, the world around them silent, except for the storm. Sarah swallowed hard, her eyes never leaving his. What now? Sarah stared out the window, the night stretching out before her in the form of an endless rain. Her heart ached from the confrontation earlier. Her partner's betrayal still stung, and yet she couldn't bring herself to fully sever ties. I can't keep doing this, she whispered to herself. But how could she walk away when she still loved him? Her mind was a tangle of contradictions, each thought pulling her in a different direction. The pain of betrayal was deep, but so was the love she'd once had for him. The truth was too much to bear, but the thought of facing it, of living without him, was more unbearable still. Every time she tried to move forward, she found herself pulling back. Was this how it was supposed to be? Torn between the past and the future, Sarah felt like she was being dragged through a storm with no end in sight. Mark, Sarah's best friend, stood in the doorway watching her struggle. He had been her constant support, but tonight, even he didn't know what to say. You can't keep holding on to him, Sarah, he said softly, stepping into the room. His words stung, but she knew he was right. I don't know how to let go, Sarah replied, her voice trembling with frustration. Mark sat beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. You have to find a way. You deserve more than this. The words were simple, but they cut through the fog in her mind. Did she deserve more? Could she ever move past the betrayal? She wanted to believe it was possible, but her heart was still tied to him. She had been through so much already. Could she really start over again? Thought terrified her, but somewhere deep down, she knew it was the only way forward. The next day, Sarah sat on the porch, gazing at the horizon as the sun began to set. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was Ethan, the man who had quietly slipped into her life during the last few weeks, and he had something to say. I'm not here to fix you, he began, his voice calm but filled with sincerity. I just want you to see your own worth. His words struck a chord deep within Sarah. She had spent so much time fighting her own worth, questioning it with every painful memory of the past. Could she trust him? Could she allow herself to believe that someone might see her for who she truly was, not the broken woman she felt she had become? You don't have to do this alone, Ethan continued, his hand gently reaching out toward hers. Sarah hesitated, looking into his eyes. For the first time in what felt like ages, she allowed herself to hope. Later that evening, Sarah stood in front of the mirror, looking at the woman staring back at her. She was different, changed by everything that had happened, but was she stronger? Could she be? She thought about Ethan's words, about Mark's insistence that she deserved more. But what about love? She whispered to her reflection. Love had been her everything, and now it felt like a distant memory, one that was slipping through her fingers. She wanted to believe that she could let go, but each time she thought about it, the memories rushed in, and the heartache followed. It was as though she was standing at the edge of a precipice, uncertain of the leap. But something inside her, a quiet voice, whispered, You can't keep holding on to what hurts you. With a deep breath, Sarah made a decision. She would take that first step. It was terrifying, but maybe that was the only way to move forward. Ethan called her the next day, asking if she was ready to talk. Sarah knew what he meant. He wanted to address everything that had been left unsaid. But could she face him again? The thought made her heart race. Was she ready for this? She picked up the phone, her fingers trembling slightly. I'm ready, she said, her voice barely a whisper. They agreed to meet at the same park where they had first crossed paths. As Sarah walked through the park, her mind replayed every moment with him. Those brief but intense conversations, the way he made her feel alive again. But that didn't change the truth. Her heart was still scarred. She didn't know if they could heal it together, but she couldn't ignore the part of her that still yearned for him. The path ahead was uncertain, but Sarah knew one thing for sure: if she was going to heal, she had to take the next step. Sarah sat on the couch, staring at the old dusty box in front of her. It had been sitting in her attic for years, untouched, filled with forgotten memories and unopened letters. She had never been brave enough to open it, until now. The time had come to face the truth, to uncover the secrets that had remained buried in her family's past. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she lifted the lid. Inside were letters, photographs, and trinkets from a time she had long tried to forget. As she sifted through the items, a letter caught her eye, written in her mother's handwriting. Her breath caught in her throat. She had always believed her mother's love was unconditional, that she had been the perfect protector. But what if the truth was far darker? What if her mother had been hiding things from her, things that could change everything she thought she knew about her past? The first letter she opened was dated years ago, from someone named George, a name Sarah had never heard before. Her hands trembled as she read the words, each one heavier than the last. "I can't keep living this lie, Sarah," it began. "You deserve to know the truth. I am your father." Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of what she was reading. Her father? The man she had been told died before she was born? The letter explained everything. The affair, the hidden secrets, the reasons why her mother had kept the truth from her. As the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place, Sarah felt a sickening twist in her stomach. Her entire life, the foundation of everything she had believed, was now called into question. Was the love she had grown up with really love at all? Or had it all been a carefully crafted illusion? Sarah sat there for what felt like hours, the letter still clutched in her hand. She was no longer sure of who she was, or what had been real. Her thoughts swirled in a haze, trying to process the revelation. She knew she needed to confront her mother, to demand answers. But what if it was too late? What if her mother's silence had been a shield, protecting her from truths that would have shattered her before? The pain of betrayal was sharper now, not just from her partner, but from the one person who had always been her foundation. As Sarah walked slowly to the kitchen, her heart heavy with the weight of the truth, she knew she couldn't stay in the dark any longer. The storm inside her had only just begun. The confrontation with her mother was inevitable. Sarah stood at the door of her mother's house, the weight of the letter still heavy in her hand. It was a Sunday afternoon, the sun barely peeking through the clouds, casting a pale light across the driveway. Her mother had always been a strong, loving figure in her life, but now Sarah wasn't so sure. The truth she had uncovered seemed to tear at the very fabric of everything they had shared. But as Sarah knocked on the door, her heart raced. She had spent her entire life believing one version of her mother, one that was loving and perfect. But this new truth, was it a lie? Or had her mother been protecting her from a darkness she wasn't ready to face? "Mom, we need to talk," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. As the door opened, she saw her mother's face, aged, kind, yet guarded. The silence between them spoke volumes. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah's voice cracked as she confronted her mother, the words she had long kept bottled up finally escaping. Her mother's face softened, and for a moment it seemed like the walls between them might crumble. But her mother's reply was not what Sarah had expected. "I was trying to protect you," she said quietly, her voice filled with regret. Some truths are too painful to bear. The silence hung between them like a thick fog, and Sarah felt her entire world begin to shift once again. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, protecting her from the truth. Was that love? Or had her mother been hiding her own fear all these years? As the weight of the revelation settled over her, Sarah realized that the only way to move forward was to forgive, not just her mother, but herself. The pain would not vanish overnight, but it was a step toward healing. The weight of Sarah's discovery still hung over her like a dark cloud. She had learned the truth about her mother, but now the realization was dawning on her she was alone in this. The life she had known was built on lies, and her mother's silence had kept her trapped in a web of illusions. But Sarah couldn't carry this burden alone anymore. As the days passed, she found herself drifting further away from those she once trusted. The distance between her and Ethan grew. Every conversation felt forced, every touch more distant than before. It was as if the emotional chasm between them had deepened irreparably. Yet part of her couldn't let go. She wanted to believe that love could heal everything, that understanding could bridge the gap. But she knew that sometimes, even love wasn't enough. The scars from the past were too deep, and the more she tried to fix the pieces, the more they seemed to slip through her fingers. The storm inside her heart intensified, and Sarah felt lost in the very life she had once thought she knew. The tension between Sarah and Ethan had reached its breaking point. She couldn't continue pretending that everything was fine when it was falling apart inside her. One evening, she finally confronted him. "I can't keep living like this," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of her words. Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with confusion and frustration. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice filled with both concern and hurt. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. "I'm not the person I used to be," she replied. "And I don't think you are either. We're both carrying too much baggage, and it's suffocating us." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken truths. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but Sarah was already pulling away, emotionally distant. The gulf between them felt insurmountable. No matter how much they wanted to fix things, it felt as though the damage was done. Sarah spent the night walking through the city, trying to clear her head. The streets were empty, the only sound the echo of her footsteps as she wandered aimlessly. The weight of everything she had learned was too much to bear. Her mind kept drifting back to the letter, to her mother's confession, and to Ethan's distant eyes. She felt as though she was slipping away from everything she had known. Her heart was torn between the desire for closure and the fear of facing the truth. The silence of the night only deepened her loneliness, and she began to question her choices. Was she running from love, or was she protecting herself from the very thing that could break her even more? The city lights flickered in the distance, reflecting off the wet pavement as Sarah continued to walk, each step taking her further from the life she once knew. The next morning, Sarah sat in the cafe waiting. She had called her mentor, hoping to find some guidance, some semblance of clarity. When he arrived, she could see the concern in his eyes, but there was also a quiet understanding. He had seen this kind of pain before. "You can't heal until you face what's broken," he told her gently, sitting across from her. Sarah sighed, her gaze fixed on the table. "But what if facing it only makes it worse?" she asked. "What if I'm better off pretending it doesn't exist?" The mentor's expression softened, and he leaned forward. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. "But you have to trust yourself first. You have to believe that you can heal, even if it seems impossible." Sarah stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe healing wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about learning to live with it. After her conversation with the mentor, Sarah returned home, her mind racing. She knew that something had to change. She couldn't keep running from the pain, from the truth. But facing it was terrifying. That night, as she stood before the mirror, Sarah made a decision. She would no longer allow the past to define her. She would confront the truth, no matter how painful, and begin the process of healing. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, and she knew it would take time. But for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt the strength within her to face whatever came next. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she was ready to take that first step. It was time to let go of the fear and allow herself to heal, even if the scars would always remain. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Sarah's heart still ached, but a newfound strength began to settle within her. As she moved through the motions of daily life, the pain didn't lessen, but it became something she could live with. She hadn't forgotten the betrayal, but she realized that the power to heal lay in her hands. One evening, as Sarah sat in the quiet of her living room, the doorbell rang. Her heart skipped a beat as she stood up, unsure of who it could be. The last person she expected stood there in front of her. It was Ethan. His face was filled with remorse, but there was something else, a vulnerability she had never seen in him before. He stepped forward, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "I know I've hurt you, Sarah," he said softly, "but I need you to know the truth." The tension in the air was palpable. Sarah's pulse quickened as she wondered what new secret he was about to reveal. Could she trust him again? Would this new revelation change everything? Ethan's words hung in the air. He told her about the secret he had been keeping, something he had never shared with anyone. "Sarah, I never wanted to hurt you," he continued, his voice filled with regret. "But I need you to know that my actions weren't just about us. They were about the guilt I carried, the fear of my own mistakes, and the shame of things I never told you. His eyes searched hers, looking for a glimmer of understanding. Sarah's heart raced as he explained how deeply the past had affected him. He confessed to things that had been buried for years, his own struggles, his fears, and the mistakes that had led to the distance between them. I couldn't face you, and I couldn't face myself, he admitted, his voice shaky. Sarah was caught in a storm of emotions, anger, confusion, but most of all, a deep sadness. Could she forgive him? Could she accept this new version of the man she had loved? Sarah stood motionless, processing the truth Ethan had just revealed. His confession had shattered the fragile calm she had built around herself. Every word he spoke seemed to unravel the walls she had so carefully constructed. "You should have told me sooner," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper, as if the words themselves were too heavy to carry. Ethan nodded, his face etched with sorrow. "I know. I should have, but I was scared." The vulnerability in his eyes pierced through her anger. Part of her wanted to lash out, to tell him that his confession was too little, too late. But another part of her, the part that still loved him, struggled with the idea of forgiveness. Could she let go of the hurt? Could she allow him back into her life after everything? The silence between them was deafening. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to find some clarity amidst the emotional storm that was now swirling inside her. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a sense of clarity. The emotions from the night before still lingered, but something had shifted. She had spent hours alone in thought, wrestling with her emotions. The truth Ethan had shared had opened a door in her heart, one she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. Yet, deep inside, she knew she couldn't continue down the path of anger and bitterness. She needed closure, not just for him, but for herself. The love she had for him was still there, buried beneath the layers of hurt and confusion. But could she truly heal and move forward with him by her side? The answer wasn't clear, but Sarah knew that the choice was now hers to make. She couldn't keep clinging to the past, but letting go would mean facing her own fears and vulnerabilities. She had been running for so long, but now, it was time to face the truth head-on. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself drawn back to the quiet moments with Ethan. Their conversations became less about the past, and more about rebuilding their connection. They still had so much to work through, but the weight of the betrayal had started to lift. Sarah realized that healing wasn't a destination, but a process. It would take time, and there would be moments of doubt and pain. But with each conversation, each shared glance, she felt a glimmer of hope return. "I can't promise that everything will be perfect," Ethan said one evening, his voice sincere, "but I'll work every day to earn back your trust." Sarah nodded, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and caution. She didn't know what the future held, but she was no longer afraid to face it, no longer afraid to love again. The days after their conversation were filled with a quiet unease. Sarah had agreed to give Ethan a second chance, but the weight of the past still hung between them. There were moments of tenderness, moments of shared laughter, but the underlying tension was undeniable. Ethan, for all his promises, was still haunted by his mistakes. Sarah, too, struggled with her own fears. Could she truly trust him again? Every glance, every touch, seemed to carry the weight of the past. But then, something shifted. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Sarah looked at Ethan differently. The shadows of doubt that had plagued her heart for so long began to fade, replaced by a quiet understanding. "I'm not perfect," Ethan said, his voice soft but sincere. "I never will be, but I'm here, trying, and I'll keep trying, every single day." Sarah felt her heart open in a way she hadn't expected. Maybe, just maybe, love wasn't about perfection. It was about the willingness to grow, to learn, and to forgive. Days passed, and Sarah found herself in a quieter place emotionally. The sharp edges of the past had dulled, and the once overwhelming feelings of betrayal and anger had started to settle. She found herself smiling more often, her heart a little lighter each day. Yet, even in this newfound calm, she still grappled with her fear of losing everything she had fought so hard to rebuild. One evening, she met her mother for dinner, something they hadn't done in years. The conversation was awkward at first, filled with polite pleasantries. But then, her mother looked at her, a deep sadness in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Sarah," she said quietly. "I did what I thought was best, but I know I failed you. I've always loved you, and I hope one day you can forgive me." Sarah's heart ached at the words, the sincerity behind them. She had always wanted her mother to admit her mistakes, to acknowledge the hurt. But now, she wasn't sure what to say. Forgiveness felt impossible, yet necessary. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Sarah replied softly, "but I'm willing to try." The weight of the moment hung in the air, neither of them knowing what the future would hold, but both willing to take the first step toward healing. The days after that dinner were filled with small steps forward. Sarah and her mother began to rebuild their relationship, cautiously but steadily. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was starting to understand her mother, not as the perfect protector she had once idolized, but as a human being with her own flaws and struggles. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of tension and silence, but they were talking. They were trying. At the same time, Sarah's relationship with Ethan continued to evolve. They spent more time together, talking about their pasts, their mistakes, and their hopes for the future. They were learning to trust each other again, piece by fragile piece. But even as the air between them cleared, Sarah knew that the road ahead wouldn't be without challenges. Trust once broken took time to rebuild. "I'm scared," Sarah admitted one night, as they sat on the couch together, her head resting on Ethan's shoulder. "I'm scared that one day, it'll all fall apart again." Ethan took her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Then we'll rebuild it piece by piece together," he said. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah believed him. The day Sarah had feared finally came. She had been holding on to her past, to the pain and betrayal, unsure of whether she was ready to let it go. But as she sat in her bedroom, looking out at the city below, she realized it was time. Time to accept that the past was just that, the past. It no longer had the power to define her. The forgiveness she had been struggling to find, both for her mother and for Ethan, had to start with herself. She couldn't move forward until she let go of the resentment, the anger that had kept her chained to a life she no longer wanted. With a deep breath, Sarah stood up, walking toward the window. She stared at the world outside, the bustling streets, the people moving in all directions, and for the first time in a long while she felt free. She wasn't perfect, and neither was her past. But today she was choosing to forgive. Today she was choosing to heal. The months that followed were filled with healing, not just for Sarah but for everyone in her life. She and Ethan grew closer, learning to embrace the imperfections in themselves and each other. Their love, once fraught with pain and betrayal, now felt like a quiet, steady presence. They still faced challenges, trust, communication, and the scars of their past, but they faced them together. Sarah had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about accepting the past and finding peace with it. She had forgiven her mother, and in doing so, had freed herself from the weight of resentment. She had forgiven Ethan, and though the scars remained, they no longer defined their relationship. Sarah smiled as she looked out at the horizon one evening, the sun setting in the distance. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. She had found peace within herself. Neil. And that was the beginning of everything. Sarah sat on the porch, the morning sun casting a soft golden glow across the landscape. She had come a long way since that night of truth and confrontation. The scars still remained, but they no longer controlled her. Time had allowed her to heal, and now, the pain from the past was but a distant echo. Ethan had kept his promises, and their bond had only grown stronger. They still faced challenges, of course. Every relationship did, but Sarah no longer feared what lay ahead. She had learned that peace wasn't found by avoiding the past, but by embracing it. She had come to understand that the road to healing was never linear, and that forgiveness, both of others and of herself, was a journey, not a destination. As she looked at Ethan standing next to her, his presence was no longer a reminder of what had been broken, but a testament to what could be rebuilt. "It feels like we're starting fresh," she said, her voice calm but filled with hope. Ethan smiled and nodded, his hand resting gently on hers. "We are," he replied softly. The weight of their shared history settled comfortably between them. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah's relationship with her mother continued to evolve. They had their difficult moments, but the bond between them was slowly being rebuilt. There was still much to forgive, but Sarah found herself growing more patient. Her mother had apologized, but that didn't erase the past. Sarah learned to accept that some wounds could never be fully healed, but that didn't mean they couldn't still be mended. One afternoon, they sat together in the kitchen, a steaming cup of tea between them. "I never understood what you went through," her mother said, her voice filled with regret. "But I see you now, Sarah. I see you for who you are." Sarah paused, looking at her mother's face, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "And I see you too," she replied softly, her voice steady. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was real. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she could breathe again. Sarah and Ethan decided to take a weekend trip away, a chance to escape the noise of daily life and spend time rediscovering each other. They went to a small cabin in the woods, surrounded by towering trees and the tranquil sounds of nature. As they sat by the fire that evening, Ethan turned to Sarah, his expression serious but filled with warmth. "I know we've come a long way," he said softly, "but there's still so much more I want to do with you, to share with you. I don't want to take any of this for granted." Sarah smiled, the warmth of the fire flickering in her eyes. "Neither do I," she replied. It was a simple moment, but in it, they both felt the weight of the progress they had made. Love wasn't perfect, but it was enough. They didn't need to have all the answers. They just needed each other. And that was enough to carry them forward. As Sarah stood by the window the following morning, watching the mist rise from the forest, she felt a deep sense of peace. The journey she had been on had been filled with twists and turns, and yet she had come out stronger, more resilient, and more connected to herself. The woman who had once been consumed by doubt and fear now stood tall, ready to face whatever the future might hold. Ethan joined her by the window, his presence a comforting reminder of the love they had rebuilt. He placed his hand on her shoulder, and for a moment they simply stood in silence, taking in the beauty of the world outside. The past would always be a part of them, but it no longer held them captive. They had learned to live with it, to grow from it. Sarah turned to Ethan, her heart full of gratitude. "I'm glad we're here," she said softly. "Together." And in that moment, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. As they left the cabin, hand in hand, Sarah felt a renewed sense of hope for the future. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time it felt like a road worth walking. With every step they took, the weight of the past seemed to lift a little more. Sarah knew there would be challenges ahead, but she was no longer afraid of them. She had learned that healing wasn't about perfection, but about accepting the imperfections and continuing to move forward. The love she had for Ethan had transformed, no longer tainted by fear or betrayal, but strengthened by their shared experiences and the vulnerability they had both shown. As they walked down the path together, Sarah smiled, knowing that she had found her way back to herself, and that was the most important thing of all.